What's up, everybody? Rob here. So, I have two great loves in my life. The first one is history. I have a master's in history. I have an undergrad degree in history as well. It's just my favorite subject. My other great love is health, nutrition, fitness, anything related to that. Now, for some reason, I have no interest in sports whatsoever. I couldn't care less about football. Baseball is mind-numbingly boring. Basketball, I don't even know when basketball season is. I just simply don't care. But for some reason, I find myself drawn to things like bodybuilding and powerlifting, things like that. I guess it's because you can't play those things. I mean, you can play football, you can play basketball. You can't actually, play bodybuilding. You can't play powerlifting. You either are one or you're not one. It's a lifestyle, not so much as, just something you can do for fun. Well, personally, I think bodybuilding has somewhat gone off the rails recently. Now, this is coming on the heels of the very tragic deaths of Dallas McCarver and Rich Piana. Very tragic time for bodybuilding. And with the Olympia just a few weeks ago, I figured this was a good time as any. I was planning on doing this a couple months down the road, but I figured this is as good a time as any to talk about this. So, here are just my thoughts on bodybuilding, the state of the sport now, and what needs to be done. Now, the point of bodybuilding is to show off the ideal human physique. It's supposed to show markers of health and overall wellness, strength, speed, power, all that kind of stuff. Make sure everything's in line, everything is in proportion. Really, that's the whole point of the sport. Now, you have the Greeks and the Romans later on, but especially the Greeks, they really started with this ideal, really elevating the human form to, really, it's a work of art in and of itself. Now, what you see here is presumably a statue of either Zeus or Poseidon. Nobody's really sure. In his right hand, there should have been something, either a thunderbolt or a trident. Since it's lost, we're not really sure who this is. But really, this is supposed to be the ideal form, the ideal male form by ancient Greek standards. Now, this is from presumably the early classical period, and it's during this time period that the ancient Greeks really started to emphasize what they believe to be the ideal human form. Now, if you look at this statue from an anatomical perspective, it shows really all the classic markers of health. His muscles are clearly defined, but they're not, excessively shredded, so it shows that he has some body fat percentage. I'm assuming, if this was a real person, this would be somewhere around, 10% body fat, which is, perfectly viable, perfectly healthy. His muscles are not overly that large, and more importantly, everything is in proportion. It's not like he has a gigantic chest with tiny arms or massive calves and tiny thighs. Everything is very much in proportion to one another. Also, if you look at the torso, there's not a tremendous taper there. Now, in modern bodybuilding terms and modern aesthetics, the taper, the V-shaped torso is paramount, and he does have it there. I mean, his lats are kind of big. The taper is there. There's the V-shaped torso, but it's not as pronounced as, say, on a modern bodybuilder or a modern day, say, an aesthetics bodybuilder. Now, if you fast forward a few centuries, you have this guy here. This is Lacunae and his sons. Probably mispronouncing that. Yeah, it's a tradition. It's a foreign name. I'm going to mispronounce it. Deal with it. I'm going to focus mostly on the central figure here. This guy is absolutely shredded. I'm going to estimate that if this was a real person, this would be 7, maybe 8% body fat, thereabouts. And if you look at his arms, there's very clear definition of all of his muscles. You have very clear biceps and triceps, very clear delts along the shoulders. If you look at his legs, the quads are very, very large and very clearly defined. You can see all the different muscle groups there. His abs, you can see the obliques, his individual abdominal muscles are also very clearly visible, and they're fairly large too. These are certainly, whoever posed for this, because I'm assuming somebody posed for this. Again, I don't know that explicitly, but if this was a real person, this person spends a tremendous amount of time working out, really just getting his body into very good shape. There's also a degree of vascularity with this. If you look at his left arm, you can see there's the vein running along his bicep up into his upper pectoral muscles. There are also veins on his quads. This guy obviously never skips leg day. That is an insult to the gods, as you know. And yeah, this guy really has nothing to be ashamed of. Whoever posed for this, I'm assuming somebody did pose for it again, like I said. Yeah, absolutely nothing to be ashamed of here. And you also have to look, much like the other statue, the one of Zeus or Poseidon, this guy is in proportion. There's no single body part that is grotesquely large compared to the other. There's not, huge shoulders and a narrow chest, or, large thighs and small calves or anything like that. Everything is in proportion. Everything is in line. Now you can talk about things like the golden ratio, 1 to 1.618. That ratio from shoulder to waist is the ideal ratio. Or you can compare other muscle groups to each other using that ratio. Some people have debated whether that's true or not, but in any case, this guy is absolutely in proportion. Now, the reason why I bring up this statue and the one of Zeus or Poseidon is that I want to show what the human body is capable of without any sort of performance-enhancing drugs. Whoever posed for these, that we're talking, this one here was created presumably in the 1st century CE. The other one was in the early classical period, so that's, I want to say, sometime in the 400s BC. And they achieved this absolutely naturally. So I just want to use these as the benchmark for what the human body is capable of without any sort of steroids or clenbuterol or any other sort of PEDs. So enough of the statues, it's time to move on to real people. Right, this is the grandfather of bodybuilding. This is Victorian strongman Eugene Sandow, and he is very similar to the ancient Greek statues. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to say he's got about like 8, maybe 9% body fat, maybe a little less. It really depends. I can't tell. It's hard to tell from this lighting and from this, it's not a high quality photo, as you can tell. But really, he's lean, but he's not super shredded either. There is some vascularity. You can tell on his biceps. And overall, he's very proportionate. There's clear definition in the muscles. There's very clear demarcation between the delts and the triceps and the biceps. The different muscle groups are very clear. The ab muscles, of course, are very obviously visible. You can see the different muscle groups in the quads and on the calves. And he does have a taper. His lats are flaring out a bit there, so he does have that V taper, but it's not super pronounced. It's not like he's a walking triangle or anything like that. Now, the reason why I'm bringing up Sandow is I want to show what a human body, an actual human body, is capable of in the pre-steroid era. Now, testosterone was discovered in the 1840s, and it was synthesized in the 1930s synthetically. Now, during Sandow's era, testosterone actually was available. It was, I think, naturally it was extracted from things like dogs and roosters and things like that. Yeah, really, really weird stuff, but whatever. So, theoretically, it was possible for Sandow to be on some sort of testosterone in some capacity, but I do highly doubt that. If there is evidence of it, I haven't seen it, so I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt here and say that this is a natural human physique. No artificial drugs were added in, and he's just not overly shredded. He's not overly muscular or disproportionate. He's got a flat stomach. So human form, pre-testosterone. All right, so we're going to fast forward to the so-called golden age of bodybuilding. This is an Austrian guy, I think, Arnold Schwarzen something. I can never pronounce foreign names. You guys know me. Yes, I know who Arnold is. Seriously, greatest bodybuilder of all time, arguably. He's the greatest champion ever. He's like, he picks it up, he puts it down, he runs in circles, gets to the chopper. Yeah. Okay, moving along. Now, Arnold is absolutely massive, especially compared to Sandow. I mean, just look at his biceps. I mean, he's got the peak on it, something that really Sandow never had. He has very, very clearly defined muscles. I mean, you can see the very clear definition. Whereas, with Sandow and the Greek statues, they were there. You could see the different muscle groups. But here, there seems like deep lines, almost like with somebody carved him out with a knife. Very clearly defined muscle groups, especially along the quads. You can see all the different muscle heads, muscle groupings there. His biceps and triceps are very clearly delineated. Look at the definition on his quads. I mean, Arnold was never really known for his legs. He was more of known for his upper body, for his pecs especially. That was his real selling point. That was his major point of pride. And even still, his lower body is very well developed. He also is much more vascular. You can see right here along his upper chest and along his arms, his bicep, there's that one big vein. His forearms are absolutely vascular, to an incredible degree there. So that, again, implies a very low body fat percentage and also very little in by way of retained water. You can also see different striations on him. You can actually see the individual muscle fibers, especially along his delts. Really, he just is shredded to a much higher degree than in previous eras. Now, like I said before, Arnold's real point of pride was his upper body, especially his chest and his arms, to an extent. His pecs look almost inflated. They almost look like they're oversized, especially compare them to Sandow, who was pretty much flat compared to him. Arnold is just absolutely massive. Now, the reason for this, that I want to bring this up, though, is that Arnold absolutely was on some sort of performance-enhancing drug. He has admitted it in many interviews. It was really just the common thing at the time. It wasn't illegal. It was sort of like taking creatine, like creatine is today. You can just, get some steroids, get some D-balled, and it really just wasn't that big of a deal. Even with the use of these performance-enhancing drugs, however, Arnold is absolutely in proportion. I think he's in the Guinness Book of World Records for the most perfect physique or something like that. I'm not sure about that, but I don't care enough to look it up. In any case, he still has that V torso. It's very exaggerated, especially with his pecs and his lats flaring out like that, coming down to a relatively smaller waist. So he is still very aesthetic. Now, there's no way this size can be achieved with natural means. Let's just be honest with ourselves here. If you're going to be this size, there's going to be some sort of drugs involved. There's going to be some sort of steroids or something like that. But it's in no way overly done. Arnold himself took pride in the fact that he was always proportionate. He didn't want to emphasize the size of his muscles so much as he wanted to emphasize the proportion to one another. His biceps aren't too big compared to his triceps. His chest isn't too big compared to his delts, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It wasn't just, as much mass as possible. And really, this was the aesthetic that was popular through the 60s, the 70s, and into the 80s. Again, that was the golden era of bodybuilding when Arnold reigned supreme. And just check out Pumping Iron. It's one of my favorite documentaries. It's great to watch even now. All right, now let's fast forward a few decades to the early 90s. This is Dorian Yates in probably the most classic pose of his, most classic photo at least. I just want to start off by saying I really like Dorian Yates. I saw him a couple weeks ago on the Joe Rogan Experience, and really cool dude, really like him. I've always really liked him a lot. Really down-to-earth, humble, very intelligent, articulate guy. If you haven't seen any of his interviews, I think he's on London Real. Check that out. Check out the Joe Rogan one as well. Just really cool dude, really interesting guy. In any case, he was the first of the mass monsters. Now, Arnold, like I said before, was more interested in the symmetry and the proportion, really trying to emphasize the human physique to its maximum possible degree. Really just an exaggerated version of what the human body is capable of. Dorian said, and he will say it openly, he wanted the judges to drop their pencils when he walks on stage. He wanted to just be so utterly massive that nobody had ever seen that before. And he was a huge guy. In the off-season, I think his weight was well over 300 pounds, and he was, I think, 5'10". So he's, average height and just absolutely massive. I mean, massive to an impossible degree. And that's what's really emphasized here. I mean, his lats are absolutely flaring out. The taper is much more, it's not even a gentle taper. You see his lats flaring out, and then his lower midsection is just pretty much a parallel straight line. So it's not a V-shaped torso so much as it is kind of a Y-shaped torso. It's just like this, goes up a bit and then it flares out for his lats. His pecs are huge. His biceps are probably larger than my head. It would not surprise me at all if they were, in all honesty. He's also much more vascular than Arnold was. If you look at his forearms, they're just like cables, really, surging down his forearms there. And this is, in my opinion, where bodybuilding starts to go a little bit off the rails. With all respect to Mr. Yates, again, I'm a huge fan of his. I mean, he's an awesome guy. But this is really when it starts to really miss the point of bodybuilding. Instead of trying to show off what is the ideal male physique, it became, okay, how big can we get this? How massive can we make ourselves? How much, how exaggerated can we make the human torso? Like, we're trying to literally become superheroes here. Honestly, it's really started with this particular era. Now, he does have the traditional markers of masculine health and well-being. I mean, he does have the V-shaped torso. He has the flat stomach. but it's really just being exaggerated to an impossible degree. There's, again, no possible way this could be done without some sort of steroids or performance-enhancing drugs. Dorian Yates has openly admitted this. He gives pretty much his entire regimen, like, I took this and I took this and this is how many milligrams I took and all that stuff. He's very open about it. So it was in this era, started in the early 90s, where there was this massive paradigm shift. Back during the golden age of bodybuilding, the idea was size of the muscle, of course, but also the symmetry, the proportion, and the definition of the muscles was the primary idea. Now, with Dorian Yates and then later champions, the idea became, how much mass can we put on a person? It really, the ideas of symmetry and proportion were thrown out the window in favor of just absolute, just size and just being a freak of nature. I mean, and I mean that in the nicest way possible. Just being, like in Dorian Yates' own words, he wanted the judges to drop their pencils when they saw him. They didn't want to see, oh, look, that is a perfect human form there. He wanted people to look at him and say, wow, that guy is a force of nature. I mean, he wanted people to, have their minds blown by what the human body is capable of. And honestly, I can't blame him entirely for this new movement. Honestly, the judges had to score him well, and people had to want to have seen that. I mean, you can show up on the Olympia stage looking any way you want. If the judges score you badly, well, that's not going to go anywhere. I mean, like, if I showed up on the Olympia stage, I'd be laughed off. I mean, of course, I'm not a pro or anything, but you get my point. If people didn't want to see this, then obviously wouldn't have scored well, and the idea wouldn't have taken off. But since the judges did score him well, he won the Olympia multiple times. People thought this was okay. This is what we're going to do now. We're going to throw out the old ideas of symmetry and proportion and all that, and we're just going to go straight for massive size. So this brings us to the current age. We have Phil Heath there on the left, and you have Kai Green on the right. I believe this is from last year's Olympia. I could be mistaken. I don't know. I just did a quick Google search, and this is what popped up. In any case, this is bodybuilding at its highest level, and this is what bodybuilding has become. Now, these guys are absolutely massive as well. They're following in the footsteps of Dorian Yates and the other mass monsters. These guys are just absolutely huge, and their conditioning is much, much higher than in previous eras. Their body fat percentage is probably, I would not surprise me if it was 6%, possibly even lower. Their musculature is just off the charts in terms of its size. They have probably like zero water weight. I mean, these guys are, passing out from, dehydration once they step off stage. So, now, as far as their physiques are concerned, I wanted to show them in their most ideal light. I didn't want to, there's plenty of pictures of these guys with their, distended stomachs and all that stuff, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I want to show them, as fairly as possible in their most ideal light. There they are in competition shape, on stage, posing, ready to go. So now their muscles are very clearly defined. There's lots of definition there. And they do have that V taper. Their lats are flared out perfectly well, and it does show that traditional masculine form. Okay, now I have two particular issues that I want to talk about here. And first is just the size. The size is just massive to the point of, let's just face it, it's preposterously sized. And I mean this with all respect to these guys. These guys are the absolute masters of their craft. They're the best in the field, best in their particular fields here, and I have nothing but the utmost respect for them as athletes and as competitors in their sport. I'm just trying to be brutally honest here with my opinion on this. And really, this here shows where bodybuilding has gone. It went from the idea of bodybuilding being what is the ideal male form to how much muscle can we slap onto a person. Now, if you want to compare it to a sculpture, it's kind of different, two different philosophies here. Usually it was, how can I sculpt this particular, like I have this certain amount of clay, this certain amount of marble, whatever, this certain amount of, muscle and bone and whatever. How can I sculpt that into the most aesthetically pleasing form? Whereas at this point, we're doing the opposite. Instead of, looking at a block of marble like Michelangelo and, chipping away and carving out the form we want, what we're doing is we're just going to keep adding more and more clay to it. We're just going to keep adding more and more, mass to it, more and more substance, more and more clay, and in this case, muscle and all that stuff to try to just get it to the maximum size possible. The other issue that I have here is the midsections. Really, again, like I said multiple times, and it bears repeating, the idea of bodybuilding is what is the ideal male form, and the stomach should be flat, the midsection, the abs should be flat and very prominent. Here, there's very little in terms of abdominal definition. It's almost as if there's, say, a rounded, disc or something on their midsections, and then somebody added clay to that instead of being, the muscles being carved in. What it is like abs are now added on, and they're really not that clearly defined to begin with. Now, this may be due to the use of insulin, the rise of use of insulin in the past couple of years as a way to stimulate muscle growth, or some say it's because of human growth hormone that's causing the organs inside their stomachs to actually grow out, and that pushes the abdominal wall out. In any particular case, it really doesn't matter. The point is that the standard for bodybuilding at the highest level is having this bubble gut, or this I prefer something like turtle shell, like, because it kind of does look like a turtle shell that's just been like stapled onto their where their abs should be. Now, this is pretty indicative of what the sport has become. It's really about the spectacle over the substance. Gone are the days of a very large guy, but perfectly proportioned, and and now it's just simply about how much mass can you put on, how big are you, how huge can you make your muscles, and damn the consequences. Because if people of this size, they have all kinds of health problems. I mean, let's just be perfectly honest. The human heart is not designed to handle something this big. It's not designed to have that much hormones and insulin and all that stuff pumped through it. The idea of a physique, of a perfect physique, is supposed to show markers of health and well-being. And this is not healthy. I mean, this is the fitness industry. The key word there being, fitness. How fit are you? Bodybuilding is supposed to show the outward manifestation of someone's, health and well-being. And honestly, being of this massive size it's pretty much antithetical to anything remotely resembling health. Now, I'm going to use somewhat of a strange metaphor here, so please bear with me for a moment. But think back to the 1980s, specifically the music scene of the 1980s. You had a lot of bands like Van Halen and Whitesnake, and the entire glam metal, hair metal scene. Their gimmick, for lack of a better term, was about spectacle. It's about big hair, lots of pyrotechnics, very tight spandex, like leather, the whole deal, just, over the top stuff. And it kept increasing over the decades. So you have 1983 level of hair, compare that to 1988 level of hair. 1988 level of hair is like several cans of Aquanet being teased out for hours. Well, eventually you're going to end up just reaching critical mass. I mean, you can't, make the spandex any tighter, you can't make the hair any bigger, you can't make the music any louder, you can't, you can only talk about girls and partying and drugs and all that stuff, so much before, people get sick of it. You can't make it any bigger, and you can't backtrack either because you've crossed that threshold. I mean, you can't really downgrade, go back to, 1983 levels of insanity in 1988. So, because you can't really go any further in one direction, the pendulum swings back the other direction. It just, it swings back hard. I mean, that at this point, you got late 80s, early 90s, you have grunge coming out. You have Nirvana and Soundgarden, Stone Temple Pilots, all these guys. And they're the exact opposite of these glam metal bands. How much spandex did they wear? Nothing. I mean, they wore, flannel shirts and, torn jeans. And not torn, fashionably. They're torn because they're 10-something years old and they just don't care. They have, precisely zero Aquanet. And what are they singing about? Is it about partying and girls and all that stuff? No, it's about depression and loneliness and the meaninglessness of life and all that stuff, nihilistic stuff. The pendulum shifted to something completely opposite. And bodybuilding is really at this nirvana moment, for lack of any sort of better term. When you have mass monsters of this size, I mean, how much more can the sport grow? I mean, both physically, how much muscle can someone sustain, the human body sustain without, exploding? But also metaphorically, where is it going to go from here? How is the sport going to continually develop? And there's a cost to this. I mean, we've lost, like I've established many times over, we've lost the idea of the perfect male aesthetic here. And this comes with the side effect of, the bubble gut, of the turtle shell. And I'm not the only one that's spoken about this. Many people have talked about bodybuilding as, some people go as far as to say it's dying out or something like that. I don't think that's the case. I think that's a bit hyperbolic. But it's really got to change. It's got to evolve, and I think the best way to do that is to take a step backwards. Now, the reason why these bubble guts and these mass monsters exist is because they score well. That's what people want to see, and that's what the judges reward them. So obviously, that's what people are going to do. So if you take something like a free market approach to this, if people were to suddenly stop going to see these mass monsters and bubble guts and go back to classic physiques, like you see Steve Reeves right here, one of the all-time greats. If that's where the money is, then that's where the market's going to go. I mean, people are going to see the classic physiques and they're willing to pay for it, then that's what the industry is going to go towards. Now, I think we kind of stepped through a threshold here, and we're not going to be getting, classic physique in any meaningful way. The mass monsters, they're here to stay. But really simply, a simple way to get rid of the bubble gut issue, just add the vacuum pose as a mandatory. I mean, that's just a pose they have to hit. It's very difficult to do when your stomach is distended like that. And that should pretty much clear up the bubble gut issue. Yes, and it is entirely possible to be an absolute freak, to be a mass monster, and still pull off a vacuum pose. Now, as far as steroids and other performance-enhancing drugs go, I'm not naive. Even in classic physique or men's aesthetic or men's fitness or whatever it is, or really any type of sport, really, there's going to be steroids. If you put money on the line in some sort of competition, people are going to cheat. It's just inevitable. It's human nature. People will find some way around the rules. There's always some new way to cheat. Somebody's going to try it. Honestly, the cat's out of the bag. It's going to happen. But if we are going to bring back these classic physiques, if we are going to bring back bodybuilding to its original intent, we're going to have to vote with our wallets. It's supply and demand. If we demand classic physiques, the industry must supply it or it's going to go under. So support classic physiques, support classic aesthetic of bodybuilders over the mass monsters, and vote with your wallet. I mean, money talks. That's what it's all about. I mean, in the men's classic physique category and men's aesthetics, I mean, the prize amounts are laughable. The big money is still in the mass monsters, and until that changes, really nothing's going to happen. So it's up to you to demand that the industry supply what you want. Alright, so that's the video. I hope you liked it. I was hoping to make this brief, 10 to 15 minutes, and of course, you know me, I gotta ramble on and on about nothing. That's just, these things just sort of happen. I get caught up, and there you go. Not like I actually script these things or anything. I just sort of have bullet points and I just go. So I really need to work on the editing with this a bit more, but whatever. So anyway, hit the like and subscribe button. More videos are going to be coming out, honestly, whenever I get around to it, and see you later. Have a good day, or don't. I don't care. You're adults. Do whatever you like. Later.